Broadcasting from the Hip Hop Weekly studios, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Civic Cipher, where our mission is to foster allyship, empathy, and understanding. I am your host, Ramses Ja.
He is Ramses Ja. I am Q Ward. You are tuned in to Civic Cipher.
Yes, you are. And we appreciate that because we are trying to do some good work at a time that is challenging for people who want to do good work. But today we feel fortified and we feel like it is the best time to redouble our efforts because we are going to be talking with someone who has earned our respect, someone that has been, in the media space with us before. We've been able to have conversations with him before, and we're happy to introduce him to you, our listener. He goes by the name of Yannick Gill. He's a human rights lawyer based in Washington, D.C. He's worked in Congress with two progressive members of the House of Representatives. He is an accomplished human rights advocate defending marginalized people across the United States and abroad. And today we are going to be discussing Donald Trump's first 100 days in office. So welcome to the show, Yannick.
Glad to be here with you both.
Yeah, man. We appreciate it, man. I know you're a busy guy and you taking the time out to kind of help us make heads or tails of the goings on, the political goings on out there in D.C. Really means a lot to us. We're also going to be discussing, the attacks on DEI, which is something that we cover quite a bit on this show. But, this is an ongoing conversation. We have a way Black history fact and a Baba that I really want you to stick around for. I'm really excited about both of those, if we can get to them, because I anticipate us having a really important conversation today with Yannick. But we have so much for you to stick around for. So please be sure to hang out and learn as we learn. But before we get to the learning, let's celebrate. As always, now is the time for some ebony excellence.
Shall we?
Yeah. I think we shall. So today's Ebony Excellence, this comes from WSB-TV2. Andre 3000 and Big Boy were on the ballot for the very first time. The only real question is whether or not they would go into the Hall of Fame together. On Sunday night, live on American Idol, it was announced that Atlanta's own hip-hop legends Outkast will be headed to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio. They will join 7 other performers who will be inducted into the performer category. Bad Company, Chubby Checker, Joe Crocker, Cyndi Lauper, Soundgarden, and the White Stripes all will join Outkast in receiving their award November 8th in the Peacock Theater in Los Angeles. Andre 3000 and Big Boy, aka Outkast, teamed up way back in the early 1990s when they were high school students in Atlanta. The two released their first album in 1994. The duo have won 6 Grammys for their work over the years, peaking with their highly acclaimed Speaker Box / The Love Below album, which was released in 2003. Both Andre and Big Boy have produced a handful of solo albums since 2007, but they did team back up and tour briefly in 2014. The two men have appeared in several films and TV shows over the years, and their legend only continues to grow. And I don't know if you have heard any of Q's and my other takes. For folks that kind of grew up listening to us, you'll know that at least I have said on many occasions, and I've never had any pushback from Q, that Outkast is the best hip hop group of all time. And we could have that conversation. We might have to have it another day. But
it might be another day.
It might be another day. But yeah, that includes NWA. I am from Compton, but that includes NWA, Wu-Tang, Ghetto Boys, you name it. Outkast, the best group of all time. To see them get their just due and be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is incredible. So shout out to Outkast. All right, Mr. Yannick Gill, do us a favor. So again, we have had conversations with you on the Black Information Network, and you always bring a sense of clarity to the massive amount of political stories, headlines, goings on that, the layperson, ourselves included, because we're not political strategists. We haven't worked with Congress folks. We kind of cover the news. But for folks that aren't as familiar with your work, like we are, talk a little bit about your background and sort of what qualifies you to help us make heads or tails of Trump's first 100 days in office.
Absolutely. And again, I'm really happy to be here with you all. I describe myself in a simple way. I'm the child of immigrants. I'm a Florida man. I'm a Black man. But I'm also a lawyer, and I've also had the privilege of advising members of Congress on how to navigate different issues that impact everyday folks. And no matter what level of education you have, no matter what job title you have, some of those core principles that I began with is really how I analyze the law, how I navigate these issues, and how I approach this new challenge that we're all in, whether we want to or not. And in my new role as senior counsel with Human Rights First, I'm able to do it all. Human Rights First is an amazing organization where we have a unique view of providing both litigation, advocacy, both here, meaning the United States, and abroad. And these first 100 days have shown us that the strike of the pen, the change of a tariff, the impact of any of these laws don't stop with our borders. It doesn't stop with any race, gender, any orientation. It's impacting all of us.
Mhm.
So above all these things, I say I'm an advocate because that's what all of us need to be right now in 2025.
Yannick, you talked about the stroke of a pen, uh, tariffs, the kind of muzzle velocity executive order disruption of seemingly every marginalized community, not just like you said in our borders, but across the world. The first 100 days, man, the executive orders and their impact on our communities specifically. From your purview, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And should we feel as kind of helpless and hopeless as we do?
So the feeling is valid. As a millennial, I get tired of hearing the word unprecedented. But in this case, it's very, very true. Donald Trump has signed an unprecedented and historic. Infamous is how our kids will probably learn about it
Mhm.
in a few years. But 142 executive orders in the first 100 days. He has moved at a neck breaking pace, impacting every sector. So, whether or not you're really into politics, in one way or another, you felt it.
Yeah.
This has been issues of immigration, asylum, human rights that I work on a day-to-day basis. It's been issues tied to student loans, which many of us can relate to, issues tied to the climate, policing, and the like. But your question tied to how it's impacting us disproportionately, meaning Black and Brown communities, is key. Within his first day in office, President Donald Trump signed several executive orders. And what it did is it placed us in a situation of chaos and fear that is still reverberating across the country. Namely, he tried to insinuate the immigration that is the foundation of our culture, the foundation of the United States, whether it be forced, as it has been for the descendants of chattel slavery, or willing economic immigration, or most recently, asylum seekers. He tried to paint this as an invasion and has used said executive orders to try and circumnavigate some of the barriers that exist, some of those checks and balances that we all learned about with the bill on Capitol Hill, and is now pushing for it to attack our constitutional rights,
Mhm.
namely basic, fundamental human rights like the ability to protest, the ability to congregate. All of these things have been challenged by a plethora of, again, 142 executive orders, many of which are actively being challenged in the courts as we speak. You see, the President Trump playbook is something that we saw in Trump 1, where he throws something flagrantly illegal at the wall to see if it sticks. Many groups, like Human Rights First, turn around and sue. And in most cases, we are able to win and uphold some of our constitutional fundamental rights. But in the interim is where the pain comes to Black and Brown communities.
Sure.
For, ex- for example, when we have situations where US citizens are now being questioned of their citizenship, are being placed into immigration proceedings, we know, just taking a step out of these technicalities, that some of these economic disparities that exist hit Black and brown folks the worst. So while you may be listening to this and think, wow, that's crazy. If I got arrested, what would I do? You might have access to bail money. You might have access to a cell phone. You may have some way to get out. But if you don't have that money, that liquid bread on hand, what happens to you? That question is not just a legal fact pattern, but it's what people are experiencing now on a day-to-day basis under Trump's America because of this onslaught of executive orders that he's unleashed.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I have discovered, because I was really interested in this last election and how it was the case that we as a country were able to reelect someone that we said no to, especially when compared to Kamala Harris, who we felt was, and we're not the only ones who felt that way. She objectively was the most qualified, candidate who ever ran for president in the history of the country.
Easy.
She had worked in all three branches of government. She was just exceptionally qualified, served as the vice president, of course. How were we able to get back there? And I learned that, as you mentioned, Donald Trump is kind of cutting through protocol, the Constitution, the rules. I learned that a huge amount of his voter base absolutely does not care that he breaks the rules, does not care that he has no fidelity to the Constitution. That's what they want. They want him to be their guy and to protect their interests. And these are the people in middle America, the reliably red states that feel overlooked, and and they're never going to give up on Donald Trump. It's just they feel afraid, they feel disenfranchised, and they feel that, and they've gotten to the point where they feel like they've been discriminated against. We had a conversation recently, Q and I, about, white evangelicals and how they are reliably, Trump's voter base. You know what I mean? And when you think of Donald Trump and you think of evangelicals, it's not their morals that they're voting on. And you would think that. Rather, it's what are they afraid of? What do they think is happening to them? And they feel like they, as human beings, and their faith is under attack. But I want to shift gears here a bit. We going into this last election, a lot of people were discussing the potential of Project 2025. It's Trump's Project 2025. He's going to implement Project 2025. And of course, Trump famously pushed back, saying, I've never heard of Project 2025. I've heard there's some good things, but we have Agenda 47. That's what we want to do. For people that are watching this playbook, or for people that are seeing Donald Trump fire people from key government positions that are typically nonpartisan and installing loyalists, that was kind of one of the big things from Project 2025, to all the other things that really mirror either the spirit or the actual language of Project 2025. How closely do you feel that the first 100 days of Donald Trump's administration reflect what the thrust of Project 2025?
It's funny that you say changing gears, because the key word in what I heard was afraid, which was woven in to Project 2025. The foundation of the plan was to hit all components of our society from every angle so that it was truly impossible to respond in a succinct, meaningful, and most importantly, strategic way. So when we're looking at things from Project 2025, what jumps out to me are some of the most scary things that was talked about. Let's think about birthright citizenship. The 14th Amendment enshrined this, that anyone born on this soil would have access to citizenship in this country. This is something that, again, has a history tied to us, tied to Black people, tied to the indigenous folks of this land.
Yeah.
And in 2025, ignoring our Constitution, ignoring years of precedent that the court has analyzed over centuries, he challenged this. And but for a lawsuit from similarly situated human rights organizations, it would have changed. That chaos is one of the many components brought up in Project 2025. So whether it be leaving the Paris Agreement, attacking the World Health Organization. Brother, there isn't enough time to go through the thick, destructive points within it. But let's be clear, that is by design.
Okay.
They wanted to make it to where the women's rights organizations versus the climate justice folks versus the civil rights folks versus the human rights folks and immigrant justice folks were so scattered. We're so concerned with these egregious attacks against our fundamental rights that we didn't have time to strategize and fight back in a strategic way, in the way that they had been plotting and planning for 4 years, ruminating after what was still an embarrassing loss, which is why it took him so long to acknowledge that he had lost. So the playbook is there, and while we've seen components of it within these first 100 days, that has already thrown our country into a chaos. Don't be fooled. It's only the beginning. We are less than halfway through the year in what is supposed to be, because, as I'm sure you all heard, our current president has unironically discussed a third term. It is just a scary time. Doesn't really articulate the complexities, both legally, socially, culturally, that we are up against right now.
You know, it is so refreshing to hear someone else say afraid and scared. We are not typically comfortable with those feelings. And a lot of times our brothers and our sisters don't want to acknowledge them. I think we saw that during COVID-19, right? The reason I think our people were so prone to buying into conspiracy theories was it was just fear. And instead of saying, I'm afraid to get the vaccine because I don't understand, we say we're going to get computer chips implanted in us in the vaccine. And the vaccine causes a list of things that should have sounded ridiculous. But again, no one wanted to acknowledge fear. So we explained it away with some things that just normally wouldn't have made sense to us. Personally, I've been having to deal with friends and colleagues, I'll flatly say, gaslighting me for being so upset at what I'm witnessing. And we use the words black and brown. In my world, that is a very, very literal thing. My children are Black, African American, and Mexican, Hispanic, Latin, mixed in a border state. And that what we've seen happen with regards to immigration, with ICE and raids and communication from, the Department of Education or the school board or the GOP in the state that we live in, where they are lockstep with the administration and the president. When you have to go get your first grader and your kindergartner from school because there might be an ICE raid, trust me, that is an actual scary thing. So thank you for acknowledging that this is not just unprecedented, but in some cases terrifying, watching someone completely ignore and disregard our Constitution. One of the things that stood out to me, Yannick, that I was really caught off guard by was the private sector's preemptive bending of the knee with regards to DEI. Like, I knew that there were places that depended on federal funding that kind of didn't have a choice. They had to just fall in line. But watching these massively successful companies and multi-billion dollar corporations preemptively kiss the ring and bend the knee was shocking for me. Maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was. How has that resonated in the position that you're in or from your purview?
It has made collaboration that much more tricky within the nonprofit space. Just as a man, it's made shopping that much more difficult.
Sure.
When I have to consider as a pedestrian where I'm shopping, how I'm getting just basic goods, because our power lies with our dollar. So let's be clear. When it comes to companies protecting their bottom line, I am less shocked. And that may be the skeptic in me. It may be just an analysis of US history and the history of capitalism across the world, where I have been grappling and still am grappling with just the impact is the attack on diversity, equity, inclusion programs within our federal government, within our schools, because so many people that I know and love have been hurt by what has been a surgical attack on communities that don't reflect how the Trump administration wants America to look. These DEI programs have nothing to do with the way that is discussed in 2025. And it breaks my heart that when I hear the word DEI, I feel compelled to provide an explanatory comma, to punctuate it with, oh, but this is what it means in this context, because the definition is within the name.
Yeah.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, but no different than woke, no different than equality or equity. The powers that be have attempted, and you know what? I'll give flowers where they're due. They have taken the words that we use to articulate justice, power, freedom, equality, and rebranded it in a way that has folks confused about what's really going on. So when it comes to the way that DEI has been attacked, I am still grappling with it. And in this case, it's not just fear of what's to happen next, it's anger because it's surgical. You all can think, again, I grew up in Florida, I'm in DC now, but not having been to y'all's border communities, I could take a wild guess and say, you've seen a black postal worker. Why? Because black folks have disproportionately represented the federal workforce for decades.
Sure.
For decades. And by attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion in this new form and fashion, they're attacking black communities. They're making it to where you have less access to upward mobility than you would have without access to federal jobs.
Yeah.
And while simultaneously attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion programs to gain access to a higher education. Again, I give pause thinking about how it is that we're supposed to approach this because it's such a complex assault on our human rights.
You know, something about, what you're saying, we found this out recently that federal jobs, and it was after the civil rights movement, when all the laws were, passed, and it kind of helped make the country more fair. But federal jobs, the federal workforce was the one place in the country where black folks could get jobs without the private sector discrimination. And so that allowed a lot of black people to access the middle class, a lot of brown people to access the middle class. And, to be fair, the middle class is shrinking, of course, but, the legacy middle class, from, we'll call it the mid 60s to today, a lot of the black folks that were able to access that was through federal programs and federal jobs, is what I mean to say. So, these attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because Q does like when we say the whole title so that people understand that as concepts, they are not wrong, bad, inconsistent with our human nature. But it's easier to politicize it by calling it DEI. But the attacks have definitely been attacks that we felt particularly so in marginalized communities. I have just kind of like maybe a minute or so here, maybe a minute and a half, but I'd like to get your thoughts on the destruction of USAID and the Department of Education and all those other sort of ancillary, well, I guess they're not ancillary things, but the additional elements that we don't talk about as often as we probably should on this show.
And with a minute, I'll keep it very direct. keep it very simple.
Mhm.
It's very easy to otherize what's happening to our Latino brother and sisters
Yeah.
if you haven't interacted with them. Maybe you're in a state where the diaspora is present. It's very easy to look at all the international issues and say, what does that have to do with me and mine right here? But when it comes to USAID, when it comes to the Department of Education, it's forcing you to remember that what happens to our brothers and our sisters, both here and abroad, will ultimately impact us. USAID is one of the primary sources for vaccinations across the world, in many parts of the world. And what we don't recognize is that by simply stripping away access to life saving vaccinations, it's not only impacting a country that you may not have heard of or don't have any interest in going to, it's impacting any and everyone that goes onto a plane there and here and ultimately ends up walking around. That's how a globalized society works.
Yeah.
That's how communicable diseases work. And it's not something that stops by you staying in your community. In 2025, if I wanted to be on the opposite side of the world tomorrow, I can book a flight, hop on a plane, and go. And most of us rest assured that the standards around health care and interconnection, it's going to be comparable. It's going to be safe. And that has a lot to do with diplomacy that USA has done. In
Oh,
the snap of a finger, Trump has destroyed this. He has destroyed our ability to gain equitable education,
right.
access to ADA regulated care for our children in schools. It's so much more than what happens on the day to day to our Latino brother and sisters
Yeah.
because these issues definitely impact all of us.